happy to make happy to be here with you and speak.
I'm so sorry, I did not notify you. For some reason, I hit live, and I think we are live. And let me welcome our viewers around the world, and thank you all for being here with us. I am very happy today because I am with Anjan Sundaram, and I have notified you all that we're going to be with him today, 1 o'clock. Initially it was 2 p.m., but we changed it to 1 o'clock, and I hope we did not inconvenience everybody, because I see that we have a couple people already checked in. Actually, not just a couple people. I see people checking in. So let me first of all test his microphone. Anjan Sundaram is an award-winning journalist, is an author of books. I'm not gonna say the number, maybe he will tell us because I know 3 of them. One of them is Bad News, Stringer, and a newly released Breakup. Thank you. And those are the 3 that I know. Do you have welcome? Thank you for joining us, Anjan. Yeah. If you mind if I call you Anjan, is that okay?
That's totally fine. Yeah, thank you, Jean-Paul. Pleasure to be here and to speak to everyone today.
Thank you so very much for taking time off and to allow us to, have this discussion with you. It's truly an honor. Told my audience, our viewers, that I've been following your work, mostly the work that you've done in Central Africa, and that will be our discussion. It will be the purpose of our discussion today. And I hope the internet is okay. Can you again say something? Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly. Can you hear me? Yeah,
great. I can hear you. So
excellent.
Again, welcome everyone, and thank you for being here with us today. So today, even though we have more to discuss, but I'm going to start with your article that was released in New York Times. I think the title was Kagame is a dictator, but the West's best friend. Is that right? One of the West's best friends. Yes. So in this article, you did say that he is a little different than Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad of Syria. But you did say that he's one of the best friends and most reliable friends, and to the West, of course. And why is that? What do you think is the case?
Well, I think the piece criticizes the West's hypocrisy in a way. The West, there's a narrative about the West promoting democracy, fighting for freedom and democracy in places like Ukraine. But the truth is actually, the West has partnered.
It's breaking up. It is breaking up. It is breaking up again.
For why it's breaking up.
Your voice dropped. Your voice dropped. I think we did not get much of what.
One second.
Can you?
Let me just.
I think you're back.
Yes, I'm going to try this network and see if it's a little bit better.
This one, so far so good.
Yes. So what I was saying was, the West is hypocritical about, fighting for freedom and democracy. It claims to be doing so in places like Ukraine. But the truth is that for decades, the West has partnered with dictatorships around the world, in the Middle East, in Africa, in Latin America. And dictatorships are very convenient for Western interests because they don't need to negotiate with the parliament. They can just negotiate with one person, whoever's the head of, the dictator, and they strike a deal with them, and whatever they need, they get. And I think Kagame is unique in this because of the scale of the crimes, the alleged crimes, and the crimes for which there's credible evidence against him, and the respect and adulation that he receives in the West. I think he's quite unique. I can't remember another dictator who has covered up crimes of this magnitude and received this level of adulation to the extent that he's as I write in the piece, that he's invited to Harvard and Yale to speak about human rights. It's absurd and surreal.
Very, very, very scary. Yes, you did mention Harvard, obviously. And also in the same article, you did mention the FIFA, how FIFA had a huge, it's probably the biggest event to elect the new leader in Africa, in Kagame's land, in Rwanda, sorry. And also the basketball, the NBA, and so many events are taken. Now Chogam took place in Kigali in June. I'm going to come back to that, but as symbolic as they are, this is, to me, it causes Rwandan people to fear Kagame even more, because they do see that he's really admired by the West, and that is also cemented by the aid, the amount of aid that you mentioned. About 70% of Rwanda national budget. Is it really because they don't know what Kagame is doing in Rwanda? Is it because they don't read your articles, or other people trying to expose his lies? And why do you think they keep doing that?
Well, part of it is just interests, right? I think everybody knows what's going on, and perhaps in Rwanda there's a unique case of self-delusion and willful ignorance because of the, what happened in 1994, the scale of the genocide, and how little the international community did to protect, the Tutsi refugee Tutsis in the refugee camps in Rwanda, the Tutsis being attacked and killed. That story became very, widely told, and there was a great deal of guilt about that. Unfortunately, what's also happened is that Kagame's crimes during the genocide, when he took over the country, and afterwards in Congo, have been minimized or ignored, because there's a feeling that, the country, Rwanda, has passed through so much that to now criticize Kagame, who's a leader, will further destabilize the country. So it's really geopolitical calculations. Kagame is now offering military support for, to help control conflicts in Mozambique and the Central African Republic. He's very clever, and as I write in the piece,
do you really think is helping, or he's getting something from it?
No, he's obviously it's both sides are getting something from it. No, it's a geopolitical kind of trade-off, and Kagame has what he's done is turned himself into a reliable partner who helps Western countries not have to risk their own soldiers in African conflicts. And Kagame says, I'll send my Rwandan soldiers so that you don't have to send American or European troops. And those governments are, incredibly happy to not have to face up to their electorates and say, we have so many soldiers killed in Africa. Why are we sending troops to Africa? All of these questions, Kagame helps them avoid. And so he's made himself very useful, in many, many ways. And that's really the core reason why, despite the truth coming out, despite everybody knowing about the crimes, why he's still supported. But like I write, I think he gets an extra degree of adulation. Because of this narrative, he's willing to, stand up to the West and cast himself as some kind of new age leader, a post-colonial leader who's standing up for the rights of the downtrodden, the former colonies in like Rwanda, like in India as well. Narendra Modi is very similar in Mexico, as I write. Andres Manuel López Obrador is also in a similar vein. And so I think there's a hunger for this kind of narrative. And again, Kagame is very clever about using this narrative. But eventually, I think, history has shown that dictators are friends of the West until they're no longer useful. And so, many the dictators have faced similar declines in support. Mobutu, Habyarimana, so many of them were friends. Yeah, were friends, and then they suddenly were not friends. And then their power declined, and all the forces that had gathered against them suddenly became too much for their regimes to bear. So I think it's even though Kagame says he's standing up to the West, to me, he's really a puppet of the West. And that he, as you say, he's 70% of his budget is financed by the West. Without Western support, his government could not, retain power in
Function,
Rwanda.
not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
He has,
and I think
he has no
everything that
people
comes
or
with that.
business to tax. He has no business to tax. He has nothing other than just the Western donors, as you mentioned in the article. And you did say something about Ubugenge. So if you are like, so I'm not sure. How good is your Kinyarwanda, by the way?
I didn't learn much Kinyarwanda, but I did learn a lot of concepts and terms that I found very interesting about Rwandan culture, like Intore, Ubupfura, Infura, and many of these Abachengesi, but also Abachengeli, Umuchengeli, these ideas of sacrifice, martyrdom. And for Ubenge, it was really the work of a friend of mine who passed away, sadly, Bert Ingelaire. He had written about Ubenge and his PhD advisor, I believe, Philip Reinchens. I'd read, he showed me some of his work on the topic. And so that's where I was trying to understand, because I think it's, from what I've read of Rwandan history, there's a long tradition of rhetoric, of providing information as necessary, of, you could call it deception, but it's diplomacy. It's rhetoric in a way. You speak in a way that is useful for your ends, and it's political, it's pragmatic. And I think some Western observers dismiss it as lies. Rwandans are liars, and I wish that there was more openness to this idea that Rwandan culture, like British culture, for example, or other countries, there's a way of speaking. It's an art form, and you use it to achieve your political ends. And I think that's a much more useful way of understanding. When the Germans came to Rwanda in the late 1900s, they were speaking to a man for many years who wasn't even the king, and they had no idea. And so
I did not know that. I did not know that.
They dressed up somebody and they sent him, you go talk to those German people,
I did not know that. I did not know that, but we have some sayings, idioms in in Rwanda. They all tend to go that road. Something that can be seen as deceit, to be honest with you. But for instance, I'm not sure I can translate correctly, but the truth that you so you save the truth. You don't speak the truth today. You can save it to. So that truth will save you down the road. So you only use it to the people that are going to protect you. So you save, instead of saying today or now, so you save it and you don't say it, and you'll use it when you think it's going to help you, going to protect you. So I cannot exactly say but in Kinyarwanda, it does explain exactly what you just said, because you know the truth, you can't say it because you're going to use it to your own advantage.
Right. And that's very much what I understood Ubenge to be. It's a complex concept, but it's one of the ideas was exactly this. And I think as much as the political class in Rwanda, politicians practice this, and maybe people practice it in their personal lives. I also found in the Rwandan journalists whom I trained in Kigali, a desire for truth, to defend the truth, to report on the truth. So it's not that one excludes the other. The universal values of truth and holding power accountable, of justice, these were practiced by the Rwandan journalists Hutu and Tutsi and Antwa, who were in my classes and I was teaching. While you also had a political class that was very skilled in rhetoric, in speaking in a certain way for political ends. And I think this Ubenge helps Kagame also craft stories for the West that the West then believes. And
you did mention that in this article when you use like how he switches from Kinyarwanda to English when he's targeting the West, and he does that all the time.
Absolutely. And when he speaks English, it's often to put down the West and to tell them, remind them of their crimes, so that you put them down, you make them feel guilty. And what I think it's a game the West is playing as well, and they found Rwanda to be useful in many ways. There's the minerals in Congo that coming to Rwanda that are being exported. There's the military support. There's the CIA listening station that's reportedly in Rwanda. It's rumored to be in Rwanda. Yeah, there's so much so many alliances that have been built now, that it's become hard for the West to step away. But that's the risk Kagame faces. He's built a regime that is almost completely dependent on Western support. And yeah, so what happens when that ends or diminishes?
And they did mention the fact that the IMF or World Bank, they all, whether it's compliance or fall for these lies. And my question to you is whether you really believe it's because of the guilt, as you mentioned in the article. Is it a guilt, or is it because these things that, it's the lobby? I call it, to me, it does resemble corruption, but that is disguised into something, because they can say something they know is untrue to get Kagame the money he wants. They put out articles that are positive, that portray Kagame as the best thing that ever happened in the world, and he gets the money. And do you think it's the guilty play a part, or it is really the lobby, which is another?
No, again, you're right. I think there's there's this book called Dead Aid by a former Goldman Sachs lawyer about how the aid industry has not, been effective. It hasn't raised as many people out of poverty around the world, in Africa, around the world, as it should have. But in Rwanda, the aid industry finds a very useful ally, because what I found in Rwanda was that if Kagame, you go to India and you try to get people to wash their hands, and maybe 10% of people will change their behavior. In Rwanda, Kagame goes on the radio and says everybody should wash their hands, and the compliance rates are 80%, 90%, 95%. It's like you see in the elections, 95%, voter participation, 99% of votes. Some of it is rigged, but probably, but a lot of it, I think, it could be genuine, because the control in Rwanda is so extreme that if you don't go out and vote, if you don't go out and obey Kagame's instructions, the local authorities will know. And then your family will face consequences. Your passport won't be renewed. Your permits won't be renewed. Your children face trouble at school. Maybe you have a loan at the bank. Your bank account has problems. Maybe you have a piece of land somewhere and that land starts to feel some pressure. So there's a variety of ways in which the government pressures you, and you're forced to comply. So it's compliance. It's with the government orders. And the aid industry, perversely, and I agree with you that it's corruption, the aid industry finds this useful. So they come out of Rwanda, they give Kagame some money or millions of dollars and say, we want people to wash their hands for hygiene or whatever, or wear slippers. And people do. And then you can measure those results. And then the aid industry goes and tells the world, look, our programs are working. What they don't say is that their programs are working because of dictatorship. And this is not sustainable. People are complying with these instructions because they're afraid of the consequences, not because they understand that this will, help their families. Maybe a small percentage do it for that reason, but a large percentage do it because they're because they're afraid. And this atmosphere of fear in Rwanda is very useful for Kagame. It's useful for the aid industry. And so they've formed a partnership, unsavory, corrupt, I believe, partnership to promote aid programs in Rwanda and get Kagame. Kagame gets the money he wants. The aid industry gets the results that they want to show off to the world. And that's unfortunate. Rwandan people are caught in the middle, where the fear and the dictatorship is useful to everybody. And so in whose interest is it to end the fear, to break the dictatorship? It's not useful for many, many interests. And programs like mine to train Rwandan journalists, in reporting the abuses of power, holding Kagame accountable, these become inconvenient for Kagame and for the aid industry as well.
And to be honest with you, I did watch, I don't remember exactly, but I think it's one of the talks that you did, whether it was an interview, whether it was in Oslo. It's in Oslo, because it was about bad news. And I laughed. It was very, very funny. I mean, to me, because I knew what you were talking about when you said if he tells them to wear slippers, it happens like to get rid of plastics. I think that's the word, that's the example you use. It happens like, to me, I interpret as the way you're saying it's like it happens as magic.
Yeah, exactly. It is like magic. And I think for many aid officials, it is magic. because in no other country
No.
do they get such results, you know? And so they think Kagame is a magician and he's a hero. I had a Native official I remember a Native official told me this about Rwanda. You know, if Kagame says everyone should wash their hands, everybody does it. And I looked at her and I asked her, and do you think this is a good thing? She said, I think it's a great thing. And I thought, this is so perverse. This is such a huge problem that people think, you know, that this is what democracy, this is what citizen participation or participatory government is about. It's really scary. Yeah.
It's very scary because for me, the reason why I understood it way better, because I know I know what it is. They're afraid, and there is zero tolerance for not washing your hands. If you don't, there's even risk of being killed. So it's not just no, and then the election, as you mentioned correctly, in my opinion, that some of the votes are genuine, but the problem comes to it comes down to whether they have a freedom of choice. Is the choice that they're making really their own?
No, exactly. I think you know, with the suppression of all the opposition candidates, people have been found almost beheaded. The Green Party vice president, you know, other opposition candidates are in jail. Others have been smeared, like Diane, I believe, had her photos,
Yes.
nude photos, doctored photos circulated to smear her and tarnish her reputation in very misogynist ways. You know, how can there be a fair and free election? It's just the conditions are not even there, and I don't think Kagame even pretends. I mean, maybe officially he says it, but he's boasted before the election that he's going to win, and you know, it's a show of force. The election becomes a show of force more than a democratic exercise, and no country in the world does anyone get nearly 99% of the vote.
Even Museveni doesn't get there. Uganda.
No, and you know, I found this is something that I found even in Rwanda when I was there. It's like a country of 100%. Everything has to be 100%. Reconciliation rates have to be 100%. You know, hand washing rates, everything has to be 100%. And there's pressure on all the local officials to make it 100%. And it's a bit absurd. And it's funny, like, you know, in the same talk in Oslo, the Oslo talk that I gave, I mentioned that I met a Russian UN officer who had grown up in the Soviet Union. And I asked, he just arrived in Rwanda, and I asked him, you know, what do you think of Rwanda? And he said, oh, it's just like the Soviet Union. I open the newspaper and there's only good news.
That was one of my questions down. Yeah, that was one of the things I was about to mention, because I think I know where the bad news topic, I mean, the title of the book came from.
Exactly. It's like, where is the bad news? Everything has to be 100%. It has to be only good news. There can't be bad news. If it's bad news, it's some small technocratic thing. Some official somewhere didn't, you know, do his job to the degree that he should, so that there's even more control. But
Yes.
is it bad news about the government abusing its power? Never. That won't be reported, because the government is only good, and Kagame can only be good. He only can be a hero, and that's the narrative. And anybody who challenges that, as you said, their lives are in danger. And that, yeah, and so that's the tragedy of Rwanda. And yeah, anyway,
yes, it's a very important, and then I hope most of my my audience, our viewers, are from Rwanda, but we do also have some Kenyans and Ugandans viewers. This is going to be very helpful. It's very important that they hear this, what you're saying here, because if I do say it sounds like it's a bias that I have against this government, but for you, because you were very much an authority on when it comes to Rwanda, you taught journalism in Rwanda. So this is not just that you have a personal vendetta, even though I'm going to come to that, the reaction of the government when you regarding this article. But I want you to say something really regarding this behavior of the West. They're trying to teach democracy to Africans, which is a very good thing. I live in a democracy. I know why it is a good thing. I live in the United States, and I wish Rwandans, even those who insult us, understand the beauty of living in a democracy. But my hope is that we're going to get there. So I want you to say something, I mean, to talk about this behavior of the West giving the OIF, the Francophonie, a Rwandan candidate, and also Kagame to be the chair of CHOGM, which is really the core values of these organizations are justice, rule of law, democracy, and free press. What can you say about that?
I just, this is one of the instances in which I just have to say that Kagame is just incredibly skilled. You have to kind of hats off to Kagame that despite all the things we've been talking about, all the journalists, all the politicians, all the human rights defenders being attacked, imprisoned, killed, that I think it speaks on the one hand to Kagame's skill in the Ubwenge, his ability to craft this rhetoric, to cast himself as a hero. And it speaks, I think, to the West's long held hypocrisy. The West is just, you can't trust it on these questions. It defends democracy when it's useful for it. I think the West rightfully has been criticized for the role it played in the genocide in Rwanda. France was supporting the Habyarimana's government, Operation Turquoise. The West was financing Habyarimana's government even when it was implementing racist, genocidal policies. So this is nothing new. And I think the thing to expose here, as the title of my article did, the online title was, he's a brutal dictator, but one of the West's best friends, is just to expose that hypocrisy and say, the West has never really defended human rights and free speech, even though it pays lip service, and sometimes it does in these organizations like CHOGM and OIF, that they're supposed to defend these values. But the truth is that military interests, economic interests, geopolitical interests often take precedence over these values. And even though it's good that we all fight for democratic values, I think, and by the way, I should say that it's not just you and me who defend it, you living in the United States and me coming from India, defending these values. Ordinary Rwandans and Rwandan journalists and Rwandan activists, human rights defenders, politicians, even the former Speaker of Parliament, Joseph Sebarenzi, all of them, all these people who have fled Rwanda or been imprisoned or been killed, all of them living in Rwanda have fought for these democratic values. So sometimes there's a narrative that, democracy is not for Africa, or it's, Africans don't want democracy, they want a strong man. It's not true. All the people who fought for that have been exiled or giving speeches in the US instead of working to build a democratic system within Rwanda. Even taking into account Rwanda's history, they wanted these values because they understand, they've lived outside, they understand how it can benefit Rwandan people, how it can lead to a more stable society in which future violence is less likely, future ethnic violence, future violence against Kagame, which Kagame is so afraid of. That's why he arrested and imprisoned Paul Rusesabagina, why he tried to assassinate Nyamwasa, why he assassinated Karegeya. All these questions, he's worried about violence, but he's created the conditions by which nobody can challenge him peacefully. And that's what many Rwandans tried to build. And Kagame just said, no, he concentrated power entirely in himself. And he's built a system where if you want to challenge Kagame, the only option now for many people is to think about military action, because anybody who tried peacefully, he shut them down. He's imprisoned them or had them killed. So, what do Rwandans do? He blames, he calls these challengers terrorists, but in reality, he's created the conditions by which that's the only way in which people see an opportunity to challenge him. And that's the tragedy that Rwandans are now living under today. And they don't deserve this. Ordinary Rwandans do not deserve to live in a country where peaceful transition of power is nearly impossible. And Kagame has made that impossible. And so that's the tragedy, that violence can happen again, and that Kagame has created these conditions for it too.
Definitely, and we fear that it's going to happen again. I hope it doesn't. And you just mentioned speakers, Sebarenzi. I often tell my people that I talk to, if you want to see how Rwanda is under Kagame, take an example. It's the only country that I can say I can because the only country that I know very well, but take an example of, or maybe you know more because you've done research in other part of the world, but it is the only country that I know has the former Speaker of the House in exile, the former Prime Minister Faustin Twagiramungu in exile, the former Minister of Defense, General Habyarimana in exile, the former Chief of Staff Kayumba in exile, the former Head of Intelligence in exile, the former Foreign Affairs Minister in exile, the former UN Ambassador in exile, and other ambassadors and ministers. It is really, the list is endless, and it keep going. I mean, those are the few that escaped prison and death. The rest of them in jail, or they're dead now, and or some of them, even generals, they have no free speech. So it's the only country that I know that has these really the statistics that are, some of them are going to share of some of the statistics by Reporters Without Borders, Reporters Sans Frontières. So in this article, you did mention the Congo. You didn't call it genocide, but you said perhaps hundreds of thousands of Hutus, and for potential acts of genocide after twice invading Democratic Republic of Congo, which I did read mapping reports, at least the executive summary, where they said if it goes to it could be the acts, it could be called acts of genocide if I think they mentioned if it goes to a tribunal, there is a potential there is a likelihood that it could be acts of genocide. So why do you think the mapping report is in shelves, in the UN shelves? What can they investigate or say?
Well, what I understand is that, so I'm not the first to mention these, Kagame's crimes in Congo. There was a Gersony report, which recorded Kagame's crimes in Rwanda.
Yes.
Then there was Alison Deforge from Human Rights Watch, who died mysteriously in a plane crash, who criticized Kagame's crimes in Congo. There were some reporters at the time who did that, who also reported on some of these, massacres of Hutus by Kagame's forces in Congo. There was Carla Del Ponte at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda that tried to hold Kagame accountable for these killings in Congo. Alison Deforge was banned from Kagame. She ended up dead. Carla Del Ponte was removed from her position at the International Criminal Tribunal. The Gersony report was buried, and for some reason he rarely speaks about it, about the crimes that he documented in Congo, in Rwanda. And the UN mapping report, even, I've read reports, journalistic accounts that Susan Rice in the US government tried to block its publication. Kagame has allies deep inside the US government. I think that dynamic and that balance is shifting now, but he's had friends for a long time who have felt that to expose his crimes is to, again, expose Rwanda, I believe, to instability. And that's been their primary goal, is what I understand, that if we don't hold Kagame accountable for all these crimes, then Rwanda will be stable, and Rwanda, that also serves us, because Rwanda is our stable partner militarily, economically, and other for development aid and international organizations. And so there's this personal interests that are trying to, or geopolitical interests that are trying to keep Kagame in power. And to do that by not exposing these crimes, and I think that's just happened over over decades. And I think the truth is out there. The truth will come out. It's very clear that people will read, and the Kagame will be held accountable at some point. And as you say, it's not for us to decide what's a genocide or not. It's for a competent court. That's who should decide whether Kagame's killings were acts of genocide. Certainly the evidence on the face of it looks credible and convincing, and it's not just from one source. It's not just the UN investigators. There's been not Gersony, Gerard Prunier, And in his book, he mentioned it. And, UN officials back in 1997 also mentioned 200,000 Hutus killed by Kagame's forces, possibly acts of genocide again. So it's been a narrative throughout the ages. And I think it's just a testament, again, we come back to the Western hypocrisy and Kagame's skill at burying and creating a narrative of himself as a hero. And so information that contradicts that narrative that he's a hero is, people get very angry about it, actually. I faced so many trolls, as you probably saw. All Kagame's trolls came out on Twitter when that article came out and accusing me of, everything from revisionist history to, denying Rwandan genocide in 1994. It's
even when you mentioned it in the article.
exactly. I have mentioned it repeatedly, but people get very, very angry and sensitive. I think because they're worried about what will happen if Kagame were to fall or to lose power. And my point there is that Kagame has created these conditions where if he loses power, there's going to be great violence. And that's his creation. He had a choice to work with all the Rwandan politicians whom you mentioned, former Minister of Defense, former UN ambassador, former Speaker of Parliament. He had the opportunity to work with them to create, to some degree, a more democratic government where power is shared. But he chose not to do that. And I think he's responsible. If there's violence in Rwanda today or tomorrow, and you've mentioned your own personal fears about that, if there is violence, Kagame will be responsible. And that's something that, we need to emphasize. And I believe the fact that, my article going on the front page, I think, is a recognition among many people who didn't want to believe, these allegations about Kagame. I think the narrative is turning. I think the editors of the New York Times chose to put that on the front page speaks to two things. One, that the narrative is turning. People are beginning to recognize Kagame's crimes. And B, the second thing is that in the past, a lot of reporters have not spoken about those crimes. So there's been this gap. It's a surprise to many people. And that's why it went up on the front page. It's news, even though it shouldn't be news. The UN mapping report is sitting on shelves since 2010, and it should not be news, but to many people it is news because of the poor reporting, because of Kagame's allies, because of so many people trying to lift Kagame up and trying to portray him as some kind of benevolent visionary, when actually, he's a dictator, and many of the problems that all dictators create, he is creating. The principal one is that, there's a risk of violence.
Yes, and then I will mention that one of a renowned journalist is Farid Zakaria, who admired your work, used to really praise Kagame, and I think that things are changing. I haven't seen Kagame on CNN and BBC. I hope he remains like this, but I want to share with you something that this is, I'm not sure you can read it. Can you read this?
Iggy here. Yeah, let me just.
Yes.
Yes.
So this is how they described your article. They did say, they used the word that you reopen wounds of Rwandans, but this was published in different media.
Right.
Rwanda, but this is Stephanie Nyombayiri's press secretary. They called her press secretary here. I think they also sometimes call her director of communication in president's office. But this is what they said. They said that that's opening the wounds of Rwandans because you mentioned this during the Kwibuka period.
Right. And my question is, how come somebody like Kizito Mihigo, who is an orphan of the genocide survivor, the face of the genocide commemorations for so many years in Rwanda, how come it's not reopening wounds when the Rwandan government says that he strangled himself to death in a police cell in Kigali? And where's Stephanie when that happens? Is that not reopening wounds? And how can she claim that moral authority to speak on behalf of genocide survivors in Rwanda when Rwandan genocide survivors have been systematically killed and robbed of their voice? The whole genocide experience and narrative is so central to Kagame's power that they don't have any voice anymore, and in some cases don't have their lives anymore. And so, yeah, I just see this as Stephanie doing her job. She's a government spokesperson. I do my job, she does her job. It's all okay. But I don't take her comments very seriously. I don't take the Rwandan government's comments very seriously on these questions. They don't have any moral authority after going after so many and killing so many genocide survivors. And another point, which I didn't cite it in my article, but I indirectly cited it, is that Kagame, during the genocide, the RPF told the UN not to send peacekeepers 1 month into the genocide. And there's this famous letter that, again, people who believe Kagame's story ignore. There's this famous letter the RPF sent, and 1 month into the genocide said the genocide's almost over. The genocide continued for 2 more months. They said the genocide's almost over, there's nobody left to save. And Alison Deforge at the time, she criticized Kagame and the RPF for that. She said countless Tutsi lives would have been saved had they allowed UN peacekeepers into Rwanda. And so again, Kagame, where's the moral authority to speak on behalf of the Tutsi survivors of the genocide when Kagame himself actively promoted policies that led to the deaths of countless Tutsis? And it's not just me saying this, it's a respected Alison Deforge from Human Rights Watch. So I just don't take, I think Kagame is just, that's why I think the concept of Ubwenge is so useful. He's doing his job. He's getting as much power as he can. But the fact that these narratives now are on the front page of the New York Times, I think speaks to a change in the narrative about Kagame. It also another thing, important thing, is Kagame tried to brand Paul Rusesabagina as a terrorist. Now, Paul Rusesabagina is now living as a free man in the US, a country which is allergic to anybody, even close to a terrorist, being free. And so I think the US government is very aware that about the deceptions, the lies that Kagame's government spun around Paul Rusesabagina. And they're waking up. I think more people in government are waking up to the fact that a lot of Kagame's discourses and claims are false. And and so slowly his fortress is crumbling.
And in your conclusion of the article, you did conclude in saying that at the very least, Western leaders, beginning in Britain, should do something simple and stop rewarding authoritarians like Mr. Kagame. And that is my first question. It is whether whether you think that is going to happen, and also why Britain? Why Britain?
Oh, it was just Britain because
mentioning Britain in this one.
Because I mentioned in that piece that the Kagame's greatest coup was the refugee deal with the UK to send asylum seekers from the UK to Rwanda, which is absurd because you're sending people fleeing dictatorships and violence to another dictatorship and violent place. But that was a coup, and so my point was that Britain should cancel that refugee asylum deal and stop endorsing Kagame in this way, in this very public way. Do I think it's going to happen? I think, well, personally, I don't believe dictatorships are a sustainable form of government, especially in Kagame's form of dictatorship, where he concentrates power in himself and people close to him. And you've mentioned the long list of people who are in exile who've been killed. If you don't share power, you become very vulnerable. And so I think, it's inevitable, sadly, that dictatorship at some point falls, like every other dictatorship in history, and that will be accompanied by violence. Whether the West, what the West will do, I think, is just, geopolitics. They're just going to decide whether Rwanda, when Mobutu used to be the West's big partner in Central Africa, the CIA listening station, all the aid programs used to go to Zaire or to, what's now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And when Mobutu fell, all that aid and support shifted to Rwanda. Mm-hmm. And who's to say who the next, friend of the West is going to be, who the next dictator who's a friend to the West is going to be? It's hard to predict these things. What I think is easier to predict is that dictatorships do fall, and they create enemies, and at some point the forces against them become too great to bear. And so I think with time, with chipping away at Kagame's reputation, I think this is inevitable. And the real question is, how do you try to do that so that it doesn't lead to another dictatorship coming into power, that it leads to all these good people who wanted, Mr. Berenzi and others who wanted a more democratic government? How can they play a greater role in Rwanda to build a a fairer, more equal, more participatory government in which Rwandans don't have to fear another round of violence just because a leader loses power. I think that's tragic. A personal fate of a leader should not be tied to the fates of or the security of people in that country, in any country, and in Rwanda especially. So I think that is a big question, and many foreign governments are maybe grappling with that. How, even if they don't want to support Kagame, how do they do that in a way? Now that he's built this dictatorship, how do they pull out support in a way that doesn't trigger more violence? So that's a tricky question, and I don't think there's an easy answer. And I think Kagame is going to benefit from that for a while. But yeah, at some point the forces are going to align against him, unfortunately, for the Rwandan people, and we'll have to see what happens then.
I appreciate that, and this deal is becoming more and more unpopular, even in the UK. Hopefully, they will come to learn that this is not good for Britain, for refugees, for migrants, and now for Rwandans as well. And then
exactly,
I don't know how much time we do have left because of your schedule, but I want to share with our audience. This is bad news. This bad news. It is a book. I do have this book. It's a great book, and this is really something that every Rwandans actually, because it is well researched, and I can't say more about this book because I read it, but I want you to mention the origin of the name, because you said bad news. I think for me, after the encounter with the Russian foreigner,
UN officer, yes. So I was at a diplomatic party and I met this, I believe the British ambassador, and or the UK High Commissioner, as it was called after Rwanda entered the Commonwealth. And I was at this party in his garden, and I met this Russian UN officer, and he just arrived, and I just asked him, how's Rwanda? And he just laughed and he said, it's just like the Soviet Union. I opened the newspaper and there's only good news. And for somebody who's grown up in a dictatorship, like that's, Russian UN officer in the Soviet Union, or people who grew up under Tito, I met such people in Rwanda and Kigali, or myself, I grew up in Dubai. When we hear only good news, we know something's wrong. And so we ask, where is the bad news? Because everywhere, there's bad news everywhere. And if it's not in the newspapers, then where is it and why? And so that's really where and really it's also a double play, right? I'm trying to write about the bad news that's suppressed, but I'm also saying in Rwanda today, the journalists who are trying to work in an honest and truthful way, the government says they're bad. So the news is bad. And so really my book is an homage to all the brave Rwandan reporters who gave their lives for freedom or country, because many of them are in exile and not happy because they would like to live in Rwanda. They gave up all these things to fight, to try and report on Kagame, to fight for freedom, to fight for truth, to hold power accountable, to try and protect and help the Rwandan people. They gave up so much, and their names cannot be spoken in Rwanda today because Kagame has said they're enemies of the state. And so my book is really an homage to them, and to this idea that Rwandans are traumatized by the genocide. Some people say the Rwandans are traumatized by the genocide. They don't protest. They don't want to rock the boat because they're happy with Kagame. It's not true. Many Rwandans gave up their lives and freedom to challenge Kagame and paid for it. And in the appendix of my book, I list some 70 Rwandan journalists who were disappeared, imprisoned, attacked, fled the country, or were killed after they criticized Kagame. And I think their brave work needs to be recognized, remembered, documented. And it's incredible for me that even today, this year we had John Twali, who was killed in a suspicious road accident after criticizing Kagame. It's incredible for me that there are brave Rwandans who step up, even after all these journalists have been harassed. They still step up and they challenge Kagame knowing the risks, and really, my book is a tribute to them. I learned so much about journalism working alongside these Rwandan journalists, and the little I could do was to write a book about their stories and give back in some way.
That is it's a very important book that tells the story about Rwandan journalism and free expression. But this is, I'm sharing in an image. It says, this is the I think it was 2023. I got this from RSF website, and it says Rwanda score. I don't know how they calculate the score. I don't even know what this means, the 46.58, but is ranked 138. There are a number of, I don't know how they come to this conclusion, but they do say that journalists killed, that is in a different, they don't mention exactly the journalists that are being killed in January. They don't say, they say there is nobody, but you will agree with me that there is not really independent journalism in Rwanda. So how do they really reconcile? There's no journalists in Rwanda, there's no free press in Rwanda, but yet it is, how do they come to these statistics?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lack of local context. The fact that there's no journalists or fewer journalists killed in Rwanda today is because so many were killed in the past that very few people dare to do any kind of journalism today. And so how do you quantify that? The climate of fear.
Right.
It's not that people are stupid and journalists are stupid, and if 5 people are killed last year, that they're going to go and continue to do their reporting. They're humans with families and children and parents, and they're going to protect themselves and they're going to keep quiet. And I think in those terms, Rwanda is one of the most tightly controlled countries in the world today. It's almost totalitarian, the level of control that the government has, Kagame has, over speech in the country. And so, yeah, I think you have to take these rankings and ratings with a grain of salt. I mean, the other thing I think is difficult is, outside Rwanda, it's hard to know what's happening unless you have very good sources with family and close contacts. And so I always take these rankings with a bit of salt. They're trying to do their best. They're saying Rwanda is a dictatorship. There's very little free speech, that journalists are being attacked. I think that's the main message that you have to take away from these reports. That a free press is essential to building a stable country, and Rwandans don't have that today. So where does Rwanda go from here? How can the world, how can journalists like myself, how can Rwandan journalists, how can international actors, people, Rwandan diaspora and exile, all of us who have some connection with Rwanda in some way, care about the country, care about the people, want to see a Rwanda where there's no violence in the future. How can that be constructed and built? That's the question that all of us have to ask ourselves. And these reports are just building blocks, proof points along the way. The fact is, Kagame is so supported by the West. Whatever happens in Rwanda, the West, I believe, was complicit and has a responsibility to bear for the genocide in 1994. And the West has now a responsibility to bear in the state Rwanda finds itself in today and whatever happens tomorrow. And so we need to pressure the West and hold the West accountable as much as we hold Kagame accountable, because they're partnering. They've partnered in very close ways to build Kagame's reputation and prevent him from being held accountable for his crimes.
And the John, you mentioned John Williams, and there is in this on this website, Reporters Without Borders, they mentioned the fact that they have 85 organizations asked for independent investigation. 85 organizations, but yet Rwanda find the driver. Nobody saw him. No one saw this driver. No one saw anything. So we don't even know. It would be wrong to say maybe it was an accident. Nobody saw anything regarding that accident. Nothing. Not a crash report. nothing. And the government fined the driver. So isn't it an admission of guilt? Because they don't want anything. They don't want publicity. They don't want this thing to be known.
Yeah, and I think I remember it reminds me of when John Leonard Rugambadje was killed in 2010. In the morning he criticized Kagame, in the evening he was shot dead. And the government, Rwandan government produced some two people who said that they killed him for some personal dispute. For me, these acts are a show of force. The Rwandan government is showing Rwandan society and the world that they can kill with impunity. They can lie about who killed the journalist, uh, make up some false story, and nothing happens. And that's a show of power. It shows that every Rwandan's life is in the hands of the government. The government can do whatever it wants with them, imprison them, make them disappear, kill them, and nobody will ask questions. Nothing will happen to the Rwandan government. The Rwandan government will not lose money, will not lose its reputation, will not lose military alliances with the West. That's what's shocking. There are no consequences from the West, and that's why the West is, complicit in what's happening in Rwanda today. And I think that's tragic. And that's why I think it's relevant to put these kinds of stories on the front pages of newspapers like the New York Times. And I think it's very telling because the New York Times is a very establishment newspaper. It's for them to criticize the West in this post-colonial narrative on their front page is a very rare thing. And personally, I think it's a culmination for myself. I've been writing about Rwanda for 10 years now, and it's taken 10 years for this to end up on the front page, for it to be, millions of people to read this and understand this, for the narrative to shift. I really think that with Paul Rusesabagina, with my piece, with other journalists who've written books and articles, with Kagame recently saying that the West should not criticize if Rwanda partners with Russia, I think these are all signs that the alliances that Kagame has traditionally had are slowly coming apart. And the question, as I said, is how can this happen in a peaceful way?
There are two short videos. I know you said you don't speak in Rwanda very well, but it's something that I want to ask you a question about and see if you can at least share your opinion on this. It's Kagame's videos, and they are in Kinyarwanda. They are not difficult Kinyarwanda, and he's telling the parliament, that it's pretty much telling the parliament that about the army or the RDF forces that are in Central Africa. I know you wrote about, your new book is about Central Africa Republic. So there is something that he mentioned in this video that you're about to hear, that they saved the government. Maybe before I ask you about this video, I know I haven't purchased this book yet, and I promise I will. But this book you mentioned, I'm gonna order this book probably within a week or so. The government was conducting genocide, or was involved in ethnic cleansing.
Right.
Is it this government, Touadéra's government, or the previous government?
Well, no, it was the forces that allowed Touadéra to come to power. Yeah.
So that's the same forces.
Yeah. It's so there was the Christians and the Muslims in conflict against each other, and it was the Christian militias called the Anti-Balaka that basically cleansed the country of Muslims, and then allowed. It wasn't Touadéra first; it was another president first. I forget her name. It was a woman president, and then Touadéra came to power. But yes, it's the Muslims have been the same forces that brought Touadéra to power. Are the forces that Kagame is now supporting.
This is for those who wants to order the book. This is the book, Breakup. And so this is the book. If you want to get it on Amazon, that's the book. So that was very interesting, because Kagame is saying that we save this government. If we if we did not do that, another government would have been in power. So then I asked myself, how in the world that is in the Rwandan government interest or Rwandan people's interest? Why would you say that in front of the parliament?
That's very interesting that you mentioned that, and it's true. It's true that Kagame's forces are now supporting a government that has crushed, the Muslims in the Central African Republic, and until today, hundreds of thousands of Muslims are living outside the Central African Republic in exile because of the violence that they faced. And Kagame's government is supporting a mostly Christian-led government in the Central African Republic today that is perpetuating the situation, if it's not directly responsible, but it's perpetuating this kind of religious divide.
I do believe this is the video. If hopefully now that's for some reason I can't share it, but that probably the that's my concern. Sorry, I'm sharing something that I should not share. This is how I'm manipulating this system. So that is something that to me, that to be bold in front of the parliament, telling the parliament that he had just informed them about the troops. This video is 5 months ago. The Kagame's video that I was trying to share is 5 months ago. And Kagame said, did you know that we have troops in Mozambique, we have troops in Central African Republic, and try to explain what their role, what they are doing in Central African Republic and Mozambique. But the parliament doesn't know. He's telling them, you didn't know that. This is why they went there. We saved the government and the opposition will be in the power. And he's bold, saying that in front of the parliament. And then how does that go with the good governance when this is the entity, this is the branch of the government that's supposed to give Kagame the money, to fund the military? What do you think about that?
For me, all of this is Kagame's posturing to the West to show that he's a strong, reliable military partner. I think there's hypocrisies from the Western side, from his side, as you mentioned. But I think it's a very powerful tool in his arsenal that Kagame can offer these troops around Africa, places that are unpopular for Western countries to send troops to. And Kagame can offer himself as his services. I think a lot of the questions that you asked me, many of the questions about why the West supports Kagame, I think this is a huge factor. And this is just propaganda, he's just, he's flaunting his military power to say that, to flaunting his achievements and how he's helping the West.
If you don't mind, I'll play this video.
Sure. And then yes, and okay, go ahead.
Yes, go ahead, please.
And then I might have to leave, unfortunately, if that's okay.
Yes, after this, and then we'll conclude.
Perfect, thank you. Sure.
Tunatanga n'amikoro yacu make dufite. Ubwo rero kugira ngo mbashimire ibyo kuba nubwo ntavuga ngo twabanje kwicara tujya inama twemeranya ko tubikora, ndabashimira ko twabikoze mugasanga ari byo namwe mukabyemera. Ndagira ngo mbandanye nanone muri Central African Republic avuye ko hari uburyo bubiri, hari gukorana na UN, hari no gukorana n'igihugu bwacyo, bilateral, hari na UN frameworks dukoreramo. Muri bilateral nabyo ni kimwe nk'ibyo bya Mozambique ku ruhande rumwe, nabyo amikoro yacu twasangiye n'abanyafurika bagenzi bacu, nabyo cyane ngo ntabwo abantu badufashije ariko bashatse gufasha bafasha, ariko dukorana n'aba Central African Republic ku buryo byabahaye agahenge bakabona amahoro, ndetse niyo mpamvu bashoboye kugira amatora y'ubushize iyo tutajyayo ntabwo baba barayagize wenda nta nubwo iriya leta iba iriho cyangwa iba yaragiyeho nta nubwo n'uriya mujyi wabo wa Bangi nawe ushobora kuba utari mu maboko yabo wari uri mu maboko y'abandi abo bari bahanganye nabo.
So pretty much it said we used our limited resources to help out this Central Africa, this African is making himself an Pan-Africanist, and also said even though we did not sit and decide together, but I appreciate that you accepted it. You accepted it, and then it said the election in Central Africa would not have happened if we did not step up, we did not help out, and this government would not be in power. And even this Bangui, the capital of Bangui, would be in the hands of another or the opposition group. And then this is honest, very troubling because they're clapping, and he's telling them that he used the limited resources that we Rwandan we need in the Central African Republic, and also we don't know what is in the national interest of this country. But do you see that the government? That is like the parliament is also another branch of the presidency. So I'm not sure.
Of course. Yes, exactly. So, I mean, there's no parliamentary power in Rwanda today. And it's interesting. I think it's interesting. We need to unpack it further, maybe in another conversation, but about how Rwanda feels that its limited resources are usefully deployed to change or hold regime in another country, to hold up a government or, prop up a government in another country. What is Rwanda's interest in this? I suspect there's some economic, military, intelligence interest. The Central African Republic has a lot of diamonds and gold. Russia is there currently with the Wagner Group. Maybe Rwanda's profiting as it profits in Congo, in Eastern Congo. So that would be a model that could be repeated in the Central African Republic. Who knows? I think it's very interesting, these questions that you're raising.
And I hope we can talk about more if you promise to return, because we need to talk. There's something unfolding in the east of Congo, in Congo, M23 in Rwanda. Is now heading to a total. I think it's going to be a total confrontation. I mean, the SADC is coming, so maybe next time we can talk about that. And these and more with these questions regarding Central African Republic.
Sounds good, Jean-Paul. Thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so very much. I was truly honored to have you, and I'm sure the audience agrees. So we see you next time.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to come back, and thank you to everybody for listening and watching. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean-Paul.
Thank you, Anjan.